Over the last few decades, I've always felt that the retro gaming community has been needlessly harsh on bootleg games, often making them the butt of the joke, while ignoring the legitimately good bootleg and unofficial games out there, or the context in which they were made and sold. So today, I'm going to be listing 20 awesome bootlegs that you should check out. So let's get started! We begin with Swat Police, a gallery shooter by ESD launched for arcades in South Korea in 2001. Although the game itself is original, many of its graphics and art assets were lifted from other games, including Contra 3, Mutation Nation, Art of Fighting 2, and Burning Fight. Thankfully, that does not stop this one from being an excellent game. You have two characters to choose from, with slightly different stats in speed and power, some pretty great 2D graphics, and a plethora of weapons and power-ups. And as you dispatch enemies, they'll drop money which you can then use to buy even more power-ups at the end of each stage. If you lose a life though, all of your weapons and ammo reset, and it can be pretty hard to recover on those later stages. You've also got destructible environments, a rolling maneuver that makes you temporarily invulnerable, and grenades which you can throw to cause even more destruction. The action in this game is absolutely non-stop, and I love it. You really gotta be on your toes, and that makes this a super fun game. And you even got a co-op option, which I sadly cannot show you because I have no friends. And it's really cool how you have to pick between defeating smaller enemies that give you barely any money but will give you more breathing room, or take out larger foes that take longer but will give you a lot more money to spend at the shop, which is a really nice risk versus reward mechanic. Also, funny thing, while researching this game I discovered that ESD at one point was hiring sales reps in America to bring the arcade machine to the West. I wonder what their plan was if Konami and SNK ever found out that this game is stealing so much of their work. Seriously though, if you enjoy games like Cabal or Wild Guns, you have to check out Swat Police. This is Top Fighter 2000 for the Mega Drive. Top Fighter 2000 is a bootleg fighting game created in Taiwan that pits multiple characters from the King of Fighters series against Goku, as well as Cyclops and Ryu from X-Men vs Street Fighter, and of course, real-life sports stars Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan, the latter of which is misspelled as Jodan. If the concept of having Michael Jordan beating up Goku is not enough to make you want to check this game out, then maybe the fact that this is a surprisingly good fighting game for the Sega Genesis will. The hit detection and speed feel perfect, mostly because this seems to be based off either King of Fighters 94 or 95, or maybe just Mugen in general. But yeah, special moves are easy to pull off, you've got super moves, counters, and a really high amount of voice samples. Although it is funny how Jordan's basketball throw sounds like he's saying skateball. And the graphics are surprisingly good for a bootleg game. I mean, hell, the Mount Rushmore stage actually looks better than it does in the official Fatal Fury 2 for the Sega Genesis, with an additional layer of parallax scrolling and a brighter color palette. The game itself obviously is not better than Street Fighter 2 or Fatal Fury 2, but this is honestly in the upper quarter of fighting games for the Sega Genesis, and I would play this over the vast majority of fighters on the system. I mean, heck, in my opinion, it's leagues better than Eternal Champions. Though it does have the major flaw of being a two-button fighting game. The characters of Michael Jordan and Muhammad Ali are really just sprite hacks of Heavy D and Lucky Glauber from King of Fighters 94. so they play exactly the same as those characters. Which explains why I can never seem to win any fights with Ali, as I was never a big fan of Heavy D. Basically, every time I play as Muhammad Ali, I float like a butterfly, but I get stung like a bit. Seriously though, if you ever get tired of Street Fighter 2 or Fatal Fury 2 on your Genesis, check out this surprisingly good alternative.
Round 2, fight!
Metal Force is a 1993 NES game made in South Korea that wears its Mega Man inspiration on its sleeve. You play as a Robo-Dude, and the whole graphical style is very Mega Man-like. And though the game is not stealing any assets of IPs, it did launch for the system without Nintendo's approval. Well, I mean, I guess this boss is technically ripping off the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but that's about it. And that's a shame too, because the game is quite excellent. The first level by itself is good enough on its own and far better than many official NES games out there. But at the same time, it also creates a bit of a bad first impression because the backgrounds are a little boring and the music is a little repetitive as well. But from level 2 onwards, the graphics and backgrounds become more interesting, with better use of color, while the music is also improved. Now, even though this looks like Mega Man, all the levels are linear and you do not get the boss's special weapon. You do, however, get to pick up a wave weapon or a boomerang weapon, as well as upgrades to their speed, power, and refire rate. This is quite simply a Mega Man inspired action platformer for the NES done right. Good graphics, good music, tight gameplay, and fun power-ups, which is especially impressive if you consider that most unlicensed and bootleg game devs at the time never had access to any official development tools. It really highlights that most bootleg developers are only guilty of the sin of being born in a country that at the time did not have the industry to support their talents. And it's especially bad when you consider how bootleg has essentially become an unending target of mockery within the YouTube retro space. So I say, check this game out. It might just change your view on the bootleg scene. This is CD Man, a shareware game made in Sweden, and if you were a PC gamer back in the day, I know you're familiar with this one, because this game was very popular within MS-DOS gaming circles. This is essentially a Pac-Man clone with new and original levels, though the character is certainly not original. Demo versions of the game were shared online for free in message boards back in the day, which featured 2 different maps and an incomplete third map. And as you can tell, the game's sound is pretty minimal. But that was pretty common for PC gaming in 1989. But what really made this game interesting was the high-resolution graphics, which were very impressive for the time, the fact that you require keys to open parts of the maze, and that your death animations were very gruesome and gory for the time. Eventually though, I'm guessing the developer realized that CD Man was getting a bit too popular for its own good, because once the final release came, a full 3 years later mind you, Pac-Man here was replaced with a new character called the Snoofer, and yeah, he kinda sucks. Not only is his design boring, but the death animations were toned down. And sure, this one actually came with every map completed, but the final release was such a letdown for CD Man fans that everyone remembers the original demo, but hardly anyone even knows about this version. So, if you want a cool Pac-Man bootleg with just a wee bit of late 80s edge, I say check out CD Man. It's worth it. This is Final Fantasy IX for the Game Boy Color. Well, kind of. The only version of this game to have been dumped changed the game's title and title screen to this. But the original release was Final Fantasy IX, and all of the assets here are still clearly inspired by that game. Anyway, this is an action RPG slash beat 'em up hybrid in which you can select between Zidane, Garnet or Vivi, with a secret fourth character that needs to be unlocked. You then begin in an overworld map and you can access your stats or go to shops where you can buy permanent attack, defense and health upgrades, as well as healing items, potions and save your game. And I gotta say, the graphics and audio are pretty good. You then go to a dungeon and fight against enemies in a beat 'em up style. You got your regular 3-hit combo, you can jump and attack, run and attack, and you even have Street Fighter-like button inputs that create special moves, but these will also consume your mana. The issue is that a lot of these moves are as of yet undocumented, because the game's manual was never scanned. The only special move that I could find was Zidane's Fireball throw, and if you brought any potions with you, you can use them at any time. You also have a high jump mechanic which works very similarly to Sega's Shinobi or Namco's Rolling Thunder series, which is a great way of giving you some breathing room as the enemies jump up or down to chase after you. From there on, you'll have to clear the multiple levels within each dungeon until you fight a boss, and then collect each boss's crystal, which the game refers to as pebbles for some reason. And you spend your hard-earned money on more stat upgrades or healing items, though I should point out that these stat boosts become more expensive the more of them you buy. And yeah, that's pretty much the game. And it's surprisingly good, with decent music, good enemy variety, and appealing backgrounds. I will say though that Vivi kind of sucks. He attacks from a distance, but his shots are on the weak side, and they take some time to recharge, so he's just kind of weak. While Garnet was the in-between. But again, I never figured out their special moves, nor are they documented anywhere, so maybe Zidane is just a beginner-friendly character, because in my opinion, he was the best character by far. And I like that as you clear a floor, the game asks if you want to continue or go back outside to recover and save your game. Honestly, this is a pretty awesome game, and I could totally see Squaresoft doing a Game Boy Color action spin-off of Final Fantasy IX back in the day. But sadly, they didn't. But thankfully, bootleg developers stepped up and we got this really impressive title. Check it out! But let's keep this Final Fantasy train going with Final Fantasy X Fantasy War. This is another beat 'em up for the Game Boy Color that, despite its name, seems to have more in common thematically with the original Final Fantasy I on the NES than Final Fantasy X. You choose between 4 playable characters, which include a warrior, a black mage, a ranger, and a chocobo. Yes, you can play as a chocobo in this game. And then you go around the various levels fighting enemies, and as you defeat them, you gain experience points and level up, making you stronger. Not only that, but you also have a pretty decent variety of moves for each character. Not only do they all have different stats, but the wizard and rogue attack from a distance, whereas the chocobo and warrior are melee fighters. Though once again, the wizard character is by far the worst one. Man, what is it with these games and nerfing wizards? You have a 3-hit combo at your disposal, as well as the usual running and jumping attacks. But you also have a desperation move by pressing both attack and jump at once, which will consume some health, as well as Street Fighter style button inputs. So for example, by performing a Hadouken, the chocobo does this diagonal jump attack, while the warrior shoots a fire wave. Add to that some pretty pretty decent music and good graphics for the system and even cutscenes between stages, and you honestly have a really astounding hidden gem for the system. Between this and Final Fantasy IX, both of these games rank among the best beat-em-ups on the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Gunbee F99, the kidnapping of Lady Akiko for the Commodore Amiga. And this is kinda sorta a port of Detana Twinbee for the Amiga, except halfway through, the developers sorta gave up and then decided to turn the game into its own thing. So you end up with a game that has its own original soundtrack, power-up system, story, cutscenes, and even protagonist. Now, you're saving the Princess Akiko, and your protagonist's name is Kiara Maguire. Oh man, that's just great! But yeah, all of the graphics and assets were either lifted directly from Konami's Detana Twinbee or remade in that style. And the gameplay is clearly inspired by Twinbee, but it's not really Twinbee. So for example, a lot of Detana Twinbee's power-ups like the option or three-way shot are simply not here, and your power-ups are now much simpler, with stuff like a faster refire rate, speed up, a double shot, and a shield. And you still get these by juggling the various bells, but now, instead of cycling between different colors, you'll get a lot more dark bells, which actually hurt you now. Not only that, but the levels are now much longer than the original game. Honestly, this game is nowhere near as good as Detana Twinbee, but then again, it was never going to rival what is, in my opinion, the best game in the series. With that said though, the developers added their own exclusive gameplay mechanics, some of which are honestly really interesting directions for the series. Like, you now sometimes get items that you need to juggle the bells into for bonus points, and the more bells you get there at once, the more multipliers you get. And this is honestly a really great idea for the series, something which I'm surprised Konami never thought of. Not only that, but you also get these crystals which you must collect every level to see the good ending. Also, in this game, you get to bomb cows, and that alone makes this game worth it for me. And Gunbee also has the unique distinction of being one of the rare instances in which a bootleg game was reviewed by a major publication at the time, with UK-based Amiga Format magazine scoring it an 80%, with its major complaint being the lack of innovation. Most games by Peruvian studio Twin Eagles Group tend to be hacks of existing games, though this one, as far as I know, was built from the ground up. And you've most likely heard of the Twin Eagles Group even if you've never realized it, mostly due to one game in particular.
Ronaldinho success!
Yes, that was them. Seriously though, check this game out. This is Alien Syndrome for the NES by Tengen. This game is in a rather unique position in that it's technically not a bootleg because Tengen had the rights to the game. But at the time, their relationship with Nintendo wasn't the best. So they went around and developed a way to bypass Nintendo's copy protection and release the game as is. So this one is not a bootleg, but it is unlicensed. And that's a shame too, because this game is easily the best home port of Alien Syndrome. You pick between two characters, though honestly, as far as I know, there's no difference between them. And then you go on a series of missions where you have to search and rescue your crewmates and then reach the exit before the time runs out. Along the way, you'll find new weapons and maps that let you know where the remaining crew members are. I always thought that Alien Syndrome for the arcades was good, but not great. I feel that if the enemies and weapons had been more interesting, this would have been an all-time classic. But as it is, it's still a fun game. And the NES version is, without a doubt, the best representation of this game I've ever seen on a home console. For starters, the game actually scrolls, unlike the Master System which used still screens, which in turn created all sorts of issues with enemy placement. The view window is also much more zoomed out than the Game Gear version, allowing you to see more of the map. Finally, I feel the bosses aren't nearly as difficult as the Sega versions, which in this case is a good thing. So I say, check this game out. This is Mars 3D for MS-DOS computers, and you're probably wondering, how is this a bootleg? It's not based on any property, and PCs are an open platform, so it can't be a bootleg, right? Well, here's the thing. Mars 3D was developed in Taiwan, and it turns out that this game literally stole chunks of code from the Doom engine and the Duke Nukem 3D's build engine, and then Frankensteined them both into a brand new engine without either side's permission. And so we got Mars 3D, which is a surprisingly good boomer shooter for the time. Although I do recommend changing those key bindings to something you're more familiar with, because the original keyboard layout is pretty awful. Anyway, this game has a pretty detailed story with mission briefings before each level and even agents that you meet up with, which give you clues and context on what you need to do next. Though if you're like me, you're probably just gonna skip all of that. What matters though is that you have a pretty nice assortment of weapons and environments to explore, from guns, lasers and rocket launchers to grenades and flamethrowers. And because this is partly based on the Duke Nukem 3D engine, you can aim up and down and even have the occasional minor platforming segments. The game also plays a surprisingly high emphasis on swimming, though luckily you never seem to run out of air, so you can navigate it as a 3D space at your own leisure. I also really like how large and cyberpunky a lot of these areas feel. And it's funny too, because there doesn't seem to be an upper limit to your health meter, so I end up having ludicrous amounts of health points. But really, if you like boomer shooters, I recommend you check this one out. It's a surprisingly good FPS, coming from a part of the world that we don't typically associate with boomer shooters or FPS games in general. So I say, check it out if you can.
Zero quarters. Zero quarters. Zero quarters. Zero quarters.
This is Super Fighters 2001 Alpha, developed in Taiwan by the king of Game Boy Color bootlegs, Vast Fame. And this is basically a bootleg version of King of Fighters 99 for the Game Boy Color. And it might just be one of the best fighting games on either the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, official or not. For starters, the speed, fighting and hit detection are excellent, which makes sense considering this game essentially stole the King of Fighters engine used for the original Game Boy. So you've got King of Fighters fan favorites like Mai, Terry, Kyoko Sanagi, Athena, and the official best girl Leona. But the developers also went ahead and added in a few extra characters not from this series, like Morgan from Darkstalkers, who is now a sexy nurse for some reason, Pung and Genan from the Samurai Showdown games. And the best part is that you can do one-on-one battles or three-on-three battles like in the arcade games. You even got super moves and they're very fun to pull off. The sprite work, as far as I can tell, is all original, but really well done, with lots of animation and detail that is faithful to the SNK originals. I mean, heck, they even kept in Mai's jiggle physics.
Nice.
For some reason though, they changed everyone's names, so Mai is now called Louis for some reason. But honestly, that's a minor issue. What truly matters is that this game is one of the best fighting games ever made for an 8-bit system. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Street Fighter II The World Warrior for MS-DOS computers, also known as SF-IBM. And this is a bootleg version of Street Fighter II developed in South Korea for IBM PCs and is usually regarded as the game that led to the creation of Mugen. Basically, if you were a PC gamer during the 90s, there's a good chance you had the misfortune of playing the official port of Street Fighter II by US Gold, which looked great, but played absolutely horribly. So this Giga Chat from Korea decided to buy the Super Nintendo version of Street Fighter and the capture card, and then proceeded to capture all the graphics from the SNES version, clean them up as best he could, and build his own version of Street Fighter II. And the funny thing is that this guy did a better job than the official port. I remember all my MS-DOS friends back in the day having both copies, and everyone always picked this version. I mean, for one thing, the controls were spot on, and you could reliably pull off special moves on a keyboard, whereas the official version, it always felt more like a matter of luck. The funny thing is that the creator would then decide to have fun with his own creation and record his own victory line readings for each character.
Attack me if you dare! I'm the strongest woman in the world!
Not only that, but as the years went on, he kept updating the game, adding extra characters like Terry Bogard, and even changing how some of the special moves work. I mean, damn! Look at how far this Shoryuken reaches! Or how about Guile's Sonic Boom Attack? And if this insanity is starting to sound familiar, then it's because that, like I said, SF-IBM was the predecessor to Mugen. Yes, this was the game where all those insane fighting game crossovers stemmed from. Though sadly, this game has become so obscure that only the OGs remember. But hey, now it's your turn to change that. So I say, check it out if you can. Hard Times is a gallery shooter released for the arcades in 1994. This is a total conversion of the game Blood Bros made by Italian game studio Playmark, where it replaces the Wild West theme with mobsters and the Prohibition era. The country is filled with identical clones of whiskey smugglers, and it's your job to stop them all. And what better way to ensure that there is no illegal drinking than making sure that there are no humans left to drink it? You'll be shooting mobsters, buildings, even ambulances, because how dare people try to get to the hospital and receive medical care after you've shot them? You are not satisfied until every city in the country is a pile of rubble. That's just the kind of proactive go-getter you are. Seriously though, this game is awesome. Not only does it feature an impressive amount of enemy sprites, but the amount of destructible environments is honestly ludicrous. And just like SWAT police, you can also roll and throw grenades, though this time there's no in-between shop, and the only power-up you get is a Tommy gun that increases your fire rate. And of course, with this being an arcade bootleg, you can also aim at the 1920s flapper girls until they lose their clothes. And if you want to blame someone someone for poor taste, blame these people. They were kind enough to show us their faces. Seriously though, this game is super fun, and I'd argue the style and music changes they went with makes Hard Times better than the original game. So I say, check it out if you can.
Okay, Graham, let's go.
Daisy the Adventurer for the NES is a game created by Codemasters which used the Aladdin Deck Enhancer, a piece of hardware that supposedly improved the capabilities of the system, though in truth most games for it never actually use these at all. Anyway, you play as Daisy, and your girlfriend has fallen into a deep magical slumber and you must now travel across the land to stop an evil wizard and save her. I feel the Daisy series does not get the respect it deserves, and I'm not sure why. Granted, the first few games were a little rough, but the series clearly became better as it continued. For starters, Daisy the Adventurer is part platformer and part adventure game, and the game introduces these mechanics very nicely, as you start out in a jail cell, but there are matches and kindling near you, so it's easy enough to figure out what you have to do and how to combine both items. From there on, you go around this world collecting items, managing your limited inventory, talk to people, and collect stars. The fun in this game is really about exploring this world and figuring out which item should be used for which puzzle or on which character. The game is also kind enough to provide you with various hints as you speak with everyone. Additionally, the graphics are nicely detailed and colorful, and the music is actually really good. I think the only two things that bother me about this game is how limited your inventory space is, so you often have to leave items on the floor and come back for them later once you figure out what to do. And the jumping. Yeah, the jumping in the Daisy games has always been kind of weird. Basically, if you jump from high altitudes, you'll roll as you land, which paralyzes you until you regain control. It does not cost you a life or anything, but it really makes many platforming segments harder than they really need to be, which is a shame because, other than that, the controls are spot on. This series honestly deserves more appreciation than it gets, as there really aren't a whole lot of platforming/adventure game hybrids out there. And the fact that you have to collect so many items kind of makes Daisy feel like a precursor to the Nintendo 64 style of 3D collectathon platforming. But regardless, I say check this one out. Mission Craft is a Starcraft shmup for arcades. Yes, seriously, they took one of the most popular RTS games in existence and turned it into a shmup for arcades. That is insane! And you know what the funniest thing is? The game is actually really good. It plays a lot like the Sakyo style of shmups, so if you've played games like Gunbird or Zero Gunner, you most likely know what to expect here. Anyway, you can pick between the Terrans, Protoss, and Zerg, and each ship has a different shot and bomb types. And what I like about the maps is that they feel like they were built using the official StarCraft level editor, and then they exported their maps onto this game, because each map follows the correct usage and placement from the official game. Not only that, but if you're familiar with the original RTS game, you'll soon find that the attention to detail here is astonishing. For example, if you take out a Terran bunker, it'll leave behind Marines who will fire at you. If you destroy a Protoss pylon, their turrets will stop firing at you. And each enemy faction has different health types like they did in the original game. Heck, if you pick the Protoss ship, it slowly regains its shields as the level progresses, because yes, you can take a few hits before you go down. And when you get a power-up, you'll get a voiceover from the appropriate faction. My biggest complaint here isn't with the game itself, but rather the audio emulation. Basically, the sound effects and voice samples are way too low, and after a few levels, the audio simply stops working. And that's a shame too, because this game is honestly really good, and I had a lot of fun trying to one-credit clear mission craft. If you like the Psycho style of shmups, I beg you, check this one out. This is Jang Pung 3 for the Master System, and this is an unofficial fighting game launched in South Korea that takes some heavy inspirations from Fatal Fury, right down to the lifting of some assets. And in fact, the game definitely feels a lot more like a Fatal Fury clone than it does like a Street Fighter one. And I mean, just look at it. Look at how smoothly it runs. For context, this was Mortal Kombat on the Master System, and this is Street Fighter 2 on the Game Boy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that those games are bad or are not impressive for their hardware, but look at how fast this game runs, while still having large and detailed sprites and backgrounds. Jang Pung 3 is pretty much a technical achievement for the system. You have multiple characters to play from, though after reading the move list, I decided to pick Ysina as my main, because her special moves are turning into a phoenix and kicking off her shoes, so clearly she's the best character. But yeah, considering 8-bit systems weren't really known for having quality fighting games, it's very interesting to see how bootleggers stepped up to the plate and in many ways delivered the goods. So I say, check this one out. Micro Machines is a racing game by Codemasters for the NES based around the popular toy series. And yes, you might be surprised to hear that this game was also launched for the NES without Nintendo's consent. In fact, Nintendo tried to sue Codemasters because they did not have an NES license. But Nintendo lost in court, and so the game launched anyway. But for all intents and purposes, this is still an unofficial game. The idea behind this series is that you're a miniature vehicle of some kind, be it a racing buggy or a boat, and you drive against 3 other opponents on tracks that are made out of everyday items. So you'll be racing around dinner tables with Cheerios marking your track, or at an office with rulers and pens serving as bridges, that sort of thing. Another cool feature about this game is that you can select your rivals, and as the game progresses, they get eliminated, and you then pick out a new rival to replace them, which can be someone better or weaker than the previous one. Not only that, but this series is famous for its excellent local multiplayer, though it seems that the NES version only allows for 2 players at once instead of the series' usual 4-player or even 8-player matches that you'd find in future games. But even with that, this is still one of the better racing games on the NES, and a really pretty one at that. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Final Fight 3 for the NES, and man, look at it! This is already an impressive looking game for the system it's running on, and the fact that it's a bootleg only serves to make this even more impressive. The game takes place after the events of Final Fight 2, and the new gang has been taking over Metro City, so now it's up to Mike Hagar, Guy, and 2 new characters to put an end to that. You've got your combo system, you can throw enemies, pick up food and money items. It's just an impressively made game for the system. And you gotta love how well animated the characters are, especially your main characters. This does come at a cost of some sprite flicker though, but it's still doable and the music isn't bad either. One thing that threw me in for a loop were the bosses. I kept hitting them and even had them stun locked, but they would just not lose health. Well, it turns out that you first have to take out all of the minor enemies first, before you can focus on the big bad guy. But yeah, once again, Pirate developers deliver on a really impressive 8-bit beat-em-up that is worth checking out. This is Ice Age 2 for the Game Boy Color. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. This game is basically Klonoa under an Ice Age skin. Yes, really. You play as okay, real talk, I've never watched the Ice Age movies, so I have no idea what their names are. And the intro story was way too long for my taste, so I just skipped it. Anyway, you play as this dude from the movie and you can grab enemies like in Klonoa. Once you do that, you can either throw them at other enemies or use them to double jump to reach higher locations. And you need to do this because some platforms are out of reach and you often have to press buttons to open up doors or passageways. You also have these floating orbs which you'll often have to grab onto before making your next jump. From here on out, you basically have two types of levels. The forced scrolling levels, where it's all about precision platforming, or the free roaming levels, where you need to explore the stages and find the levers and switches to progress. I came into this game with zero expectations, but a few people had recommended this one to me. And you know what? Yeah, they were right! This game knows what it's doing. I mean, the music isn't the best and the frame rate gets a little low when 2 or more enemies are on screen. But other than that, this game was a really awesome surprise. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Super Bomberman 3 by Syntax for the Game Boy Color, and despite its name, it's actually not your traditional Bomberman game at all. Instead, the gameplay is much more exploratory and it kind of reminds me of Robo Warrior instead, and not so much the traditional Bomberman style. Anyway, you play as Bomber Girl, I guess, and there's a plot behind this, but I have no idea what it is. And you're placed in a large open area and your job is to go around the map and look for the exit and keys to said exit, all the while picking up any power-ups along the way. Power-ups include the ability to drop more bombs, make said bombs stronger, or permanent health upgrades. The game also received another re-release simply titled Bomberman 2, which replaces the main sprite to something closer to regular Bomberman, but instead removes the intro cutscene. Either way, this is a pretty cool game, and if you're into Robo Warrior, I say check it out if you can. And finally, we have Akito Tsukasa no Fushigi no Kabe for the Famicom Disk System, an eroge puzzle game by infamous Japanese eroge bootleg game developer Super Pig. Yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but the Famicom Disk System kind of opened the floodgates for eroge games for the Famicom in Japan. Heck, I could do a whole video on just this topic, but I chose instead to focus on just one game that does not require you to learn the language. And not only that, but the few gameplay videos I've seen on YouTube seem to have no idea how to play this. So let me help you out. This is basically an Arkanoid game with perspective, and you have to move your cursor to swing the ball to where you want it to hit, destroying its block and uncovering more of the girl. While all of this happens, you have this blue square that, if it hits you, will stun you. Thankfully, you can shoot at it to make it disappear for a short time, and you can also fire at helicopters to gain a life. And the game is pretty generous with its life system. And finally, you have these two moving blocks on the side, and if you hit one, it'll destroy multiple blocks within that same line. I also really like how the ball reacts differently depending on which section of your cursor it hits. So it's a good idea to master which side of the paddle you want the ball to hit on. And the more you progress through the game, the naughtier some of these covers get. Though it never gets quite as bad as the game's cover. So if you're into some old school eroge games, this is a cool one to check out, especially when you consider the system it's on. And there we go, several awesome bootleg games that are worth your time. And believe me, there's a lot more where that came from. If this video performs well, I could easily give you many more. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Tony Toon for not only being a Patreon supporter, but also for helping me out with the Amiga emulation, as well as Discord's Ankos and the Spacetime Star Beasts Discord server, which by the way, greatest server name ever, for helping me track down some of these Game Boy Color bootlegs. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!